Yeah, so I'm starting to record. Yofi. So this is our third meeting on Shmita. Very exciting. We will begin. Ashlyn, if it's okay with you, because you said last time you might be willing to do this, to talk to us a bit about local practices in agriculture, like Albertan practices of in the earth.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I got a few things out of my dad. So he had said that they can't really afford to leave a field just lying fallow for a year, but they tend to all do summer fallow. So they chop down the weeds in May or June, and then they work it in July or August, and that gives good, minerals and stuff back to the soil. He said they either do it like a 3-year rotation or a 4-year rotation of what they use. So it's usually barley, wheat, canola, or canola, wheat, barley, peas, and then canola again, because the canola drains so much from the soil. And it also will get like clubroot in the soil if you do canola for too long, and then you can't grow canola maybe ever again because the soil is damaged. And then potatoes, he said you can do potatoes if your soil is getting depleted, and then that gives it nitrogen and minerals for 6 to 10 years. Same as legumes or like you said, peas. If you plant peas, it puts certain microorganisms back into the soil. But then he said if you do that too much, you can get like a weevil that will eat the nitrogen nodules off of the peas. So then again, it's depleted. So it just seemed like there was a real balancing act with everything.
And did he say if there was like is the rotation always the same every year between the
No, it seems like it's up to certain people's preference. And then he said out past like Alder Flats way, they tend to do like a 5-year rotation, and they put hay in there and different things that they don't tend to do in this area.
And do we know, and if people have other questions, just jump in, but I'm just curious, like, do we know if there are any practices of leaving bits of the field even wild?
He said he knows one farmer that does that does a leaving for like a whole year. They'll just leave certain areas completely fallow, but he said most people don't do that anymore, or they'll over fertilize to try and it kind of depletes the land. Yeah.
Do any of us know if in the more, sorry, I'll need to close the door here. Sorry. But do any of us know if in any of the, like either in the organic fields or in the other types of new types or old types of agriculture here, there are these practices of leaving bits of the field fallow, or also with grazing? Do we know if in the grazing areas there's any practices of leaving them fallow?
I should have asked about grazing. I don't know about that. He had mentioned about organic, that you have to leave it for so many years before you can call it that, but yeah, I don't know much about that. A lot of the people in this area are going for profit. They're not, unfortunately, the people that I know, they're not doing organic farming.
Yeah, no, people need to live. They need to earn money and feed themselves. So yeah, but I'm just wondering, I'm curious if there's any, if we know of any. So nobody knows of any other practices. Okay.
I definitely have something in my head for grazing where it just rotates between crops, but I could easily be making that up. I grew up in a farming community, but we left there when I was like 10. So I don't know if that's a residual memory or where I'm getting that information from.
Do you have anyone to ask, Ilara?
I might be, I don't, but I bet my dad would. Mm-hmm. My dad probably would. I think he's got a bunch of farmer buddies still. So I could probably check in with him and see if he could ask some of his farmer friends.
Yeah, I'm just really curious about this because, you know, we're learning it because we're learning it to know the Jewish tradition, but we're also learning it to see how we can make our Jewish tradition relevant for here nowadays.
Mhm.
So I think we need to be able to understand what people here are doing and what traditionally people have done here, to kind of take care of the land that we're using. So that's why I'm kind of asking the questions. And I think this should be like an open question to all of us as we go through this study process. If anyone has an opportunity, like keep a little notebook or something, if you have an opportunity to ask someone, like come upon a farmer or somebody who deals with these things, to ask them any questions and bring it back as a sort of ongoing process of research. Yeah, just think it would be very interesting to know what the earth here needs.
I know a bit about permaculture practices, but I think there's a bit of a disconnect between the farming culture and permaculturalists. There's not that much exchange between the two. And
Well, what can you
permaculture
tell
tends
us
to be
about the
more.
theory of permaculture on this subject?
Well, actually, I don't remember learning anything about fallowness. I mean, I know that was a part of traditional European farming. With they had a 3-strip cycle of growing grain and then something else and then letting it go fallow. But the main thing I've learned is don't keep growing the same vegetables in the same beds because it will invite insects and diseases.
Mhm.
And the potential dust bowl. Look at the Great Depression. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and in the
Well,
Grapes of Wrath
that
that we're
was-
supposed to read
that
a bit
was-
from, he has an amazing description of
Amazing.
That was because of cotton.
Sorry?
That was because of cotton. The cotton depleted the soil.
Yeah, but it still affected a whole swath of an area, and
Mhm.
it's one of the many reasons why the Great Depression happened.
I have a friend who does a lot of permaculture. I could talk to him about that.
Yeah, so that would be very interesting.
Because I hadn't thought of that connection, but we like the couple that runs our community garden at Westwood is really versed in permaculture.
Okay, so it would be interesting to hear what information they can share with us on this.
Okay. Talk to my dad and Mike and Rita. I'll make a note.
I've got a cousin and a sister-in-law that they both have large family farms, and I know they both have all of their crops on like a 5-year rotation so that things aren't growing in the same bed year after year. And they do always have one that is resting, but they're not producing mass amounts for sale and stuff. They're family farms. So I think it's much more doable for them, whereas doing it on a large scale to make profit, I think is probably pretty difficult anymore. And then that's why, we have the farmers that are basically just, using the fertilizer to keep the land going.
Okay, Tov. So thank you. So thank you, Ashlyn, for your information that you brought us. And perhaps if we could kind of open occasionally, if somebody lets me know in advance that they have some information to share about this, then we'll open the meeting with a few minutes of kind of gaining more knowledge. And also, I hope you can all get into the Shabbat of the Land notebook that I created for us. And there's one section there that's all about Albertan customs, and you could just add your information in there. Like you can put your name and say what information you brought, and then we can all look at it. So then we will kind of compile this knowledge. So even if it's just like a couple of sentences, it'll all kind of, we'll gather information as the time goes, and that would be very valuable, I think, for us. So thank you. And then the other thing I wanted you guys to look at, please, was that section from Grapes of Wrath. And read it with the eyes of Shemitah. So do you see it on the screen? Yeah, okay. So we read a bit of it, but you have the thing here. So if whoever wants can just share a few thoughts, one thought or a few thoughts that came up for you of how you read this text now, this just tiny bit of the book, after kind of starting to talk about Shemitah. If there are any questions that come up for you, or any thoughts about what the text illustrates for us about perhaps why we need Shemitah, or what Shemitah tries to address. I don't know if anyone had an opportunity to read this.
Basically, I know this book from more of a historical context of like how John Steinbeck was talking about leading into the Great Depression, things that were happening with California and different areas. This one is more about California. So initially it goes on and says, everything was bountiful. It was plentiful. There was more sexual description, more on the line describing a beautiful woman as a way of describing California and the plentifulness of California. And then as things continued, we ended up with rot, disease, things not being produced as much or very well. And that really highlights the fact that there needed to be a little bit of more rotation, maybe more planning, less chemicals put into the soil or the environment to try to reduce. Something needed to happen that was needed to be different. That's what I was kind of seeing.
Thank you, Miranda. Did anyone else find anything they wanted to look at or kind of point?
A lot of my thoughts were in alignment with what Miranda was saying, but one of the lines I think that really stuck out to me, that really related directly to Shemitah, was the last line of the second paragraph on page 361. And always they were selecting, grafting, changing, driving themselves, driving the earth to produce. And I just that really that illustrated to me, I guess the industrial model almost of always moving forward, and our current business model of the ever growth factor, but in a capital sense, not in a sustainable sense. Yeah, so that line really struck me, and then what Miranda was saying, just the very strong juxtaposition of the description of the bounty and then the description of the rot and that incredible destruction because of the capital having highest priority and people not being able to afford the food, basically.
I'm interested in this idea that you bring in, and maybe we can think about that for a moment. This driving themselves, driving the earth to produce, and this model of always growing, like the ongoing growth that we need to be in our economic structure. And I'm wondering if Shemitah tries to perhaps stop that, avoid that. Perhaps Shemitah is trying to avoid it, or at least trying to slow it down, trying to slow down the idea. I see Robert is raising his hand.
So part of the reason for that need for perpetual growth is we're a debt-based economy with interest. And so if you don't grow, you will never be able to pay the interest as well as the principal of what you owe. And so maybe that's a good segue to bring in the debt relief part of Shemitah.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that the money aspect and the debt relief is definitely important in this. I just want to see if somebody else has something to add on the grapes of wrath as an illustration, or and if not, we'll go on to the Torah.
That's actually where my thoughts on that line led to in my notes to Robert, was to the imagining the alternative piece of the debt forgiveness.
Okay, so let's go there, and let's go to that part so you can see it. Nachon, you can see the text now? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's read this here. If somebody can please read the English for us so we all have it. And then we'll talk about, because it brings in another layer of Shemitah. So let's go into that. So who can read this for us, please?
I can read it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, put down.
At the end of and this is Deuteronomy 15, I believe. At the end of 7 years, you are to make a release, Shemitah. Now this is the matter of the release. He shall release every possessor of a loan of his hand, what he has lent to his neighbor. He is not to oppress his neighbor or his brother, for the release of the Lord has been proclaimed. When there is among you a needy person from any one of your brothers within one of your gates in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you are not to toughen your heart. You are not to shut your hand to your brother, the needy one. Rather, you are to open your hand to him, and are to give pledge, pledge to him, sufficient for his lack that is lacking to him. Take you care, lest there be a word in your heart, a base one, saying, the 7th year, the year of release is nearing, and your eye will be set on ill. And I can't see any more of the text. Okay, where are we here? I think.
Did it jump?
It's further down.
Lest there be a word in your heart, a base one, and then the 7th year release is nearing, and then you're at nearing.
Yeah, in verse 9.
Okay. So does somebody else want to read from verse 9, please?
Sure.
Okay.
Take you care, lest there be a word in your heart, a base one, saying, the 7th year, the year of release is nearing, and your eye be set on ill toward your brother, the needy one, and you not give to him, so that he calls out because of you to the Lord, and sin be incurred by you. You are to give, yes, give freely to him. Your heart is not to be ill disposed in your giving to him. For on account of this matter, the Lord your God will bless you in all your doings and in all the enterprises of your hand. For the needy will never be gone from amid the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you are to open your hand to your brother, to your afflicted one, and to your needy one in your land.
Okay, so I want us first to notice something in this, is that they skipped a few verses, okay?
Oh, yeah, between 2 and 7.
They skipped a few verses. So I'm going to read you verse 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? Just so you hear. And I think it's important for our conversation. Okay, for a remission to Adonai has been proclaimed. The foreigner you make done, but that of yours which is with your brother, your hand shall remit. Yet there will be no pauper among you, for Adonai will surely bless you in the land which Adonai your God is about to give you in a state to take hold of it, only if you surely heed the voice of Adonai your God to do all this command that I charge you today. For Adonai your God has blessed you as he spoke to you, and you shall lend to many nations, but you yourself shall not borrow, and you shall dominate many nations, but you shall not dominate. So this was taken out of this book, okay? And I wish they would have left it in, because I think it's when we're trying to, because I know that we're trying to learn to do things today, but we also need to know what they thought so that we know what to fix. Okay, so we don't fall into those places. So first of all, what do we have? So at the end of the 7 years, we are to make Shemitah, or to release. And if up until now in the books of Torah, releasing was about the earth, about the land, suddenly here we have another layer. And this layer is money. Okay, that's something new. I'm curious, I was searching for this. I couldn't find information about it yet, but I'll continue searching. If this is a later layer, because it's in Deuteronomy, so it's a later text. So I'm wondering if this is a later layer of Shemitah when money became, perhaps, I don't know. This is a question and I do not know the answer.
I heard or learned somewhere like Deuteronomy is Moses giving instructions to the people, whereas Leviticus is where he's on the Mount Sinai receiving instructions. So maybe I might be misremembering that. So that might
the story of Deuteronomy is Moshe giving the Torah to the people, but historically it was a very late text. It was much later. Okay. So not from within the book, but looking at the book. It was kind of discovered at some point. Yeah, Robert.
So debt existed a long time before money in the form of coined currency existed. So people were already extending credit to one another based on commodities or some nominal value of things. So there's a good general book that I can recommend. It's David Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And it's a history of debt world history of debt. Very comprehensive and very radical in his conclusions.
Okay, so can you please add that to our notebook?
Sure.
It could be in any of these tabs. Find a tab and add the name of the book in, please.
Sure.
We can open it at the library if we want, but I think it's important that we have these books to look at. Now, where did this go? Where did it go? Okay, it's here, yeah. Okay, so you're telling us that debt is actually, when I think debt, I think money, but you're saying debt could be with barter.
Like you lend to somebody. It could be
the cow.
It could be clothes.
Your child. Yeah, okay.
Probably not a child if you...
Probably as a child. They sold their children. We have a conversation about selling children into slavery for a while, so it could be...
Yeah.
That goes back to the Bronze Age, yes.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
Well before Deuteronomy.
Okay, so that's interesting. So we have this layer of debt, beseder. I also want us to notice, and they skipped this, but this is important to notice in Torah, just because we're trying to understand what Torah tells us here, in Deuteronomy at least, is that they're differentiating between a debt that one of your people owes you and a debt that somebody from another nation owes you. Okay? So they're making a distinction. So that's something important to notice in this text. And it sits very nicely with the way Deuteronomy like with the theology and the thought of Deuteronomy. This distinction makes a lot of sense. Of course, I think when we're talking about Shemitah nowadays, it would make way more sense to let go of that distinction. But for them, and also I think it's important to notice this distinction because there's something in us as humans that we make this distinction, okay? We make a distinction between things we lend to our own family and things we lend to people that we don't know. So we need to be aware of that. So when we're thinking of how we rethink the structure outside, we need to notice our kind of inner feelings and inner biases and kind of realize them. So I would add this part of the chapter to the page here. Okay, בסדר. So we have that. Okay, so that's that. What else? So what else do we see here in this portion? About why suddenly debt? How is debt connected with letting go? Is it just the word lishmot, to let go? Why are they connecting letting go of the land and opening it up to everyone and letting go of debt?
It's linking up to the people that are needy, the ones that don't really have a lot. So by letting go of the land, you're letting it produce as it would want, and that allows the people who are needy to go ahead and have a source of food without needing to beg. So kind of connecting that way of like, hey, you need to open up your hand and any loans that you might have given to somebody who was needy.
So this is about social justice. The connection you're saying is a form of creating a just society?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a real, I guess the word would be a homology between like fertility of the soil and justice within human society, in that in both realms, there's the possibility that things go wrong and the society or the soil gets depleted, and then it stops working and it doesn't produce anymore, the society or the soil. And these are practices designed to prevent that depletion from happening.
So in order for that prevention to happen, we need to learn to not hold on.
I think that makes good sense. I like that analogy, Robert.
And I'm going back to the question of continuing growth. Does it also mean that we have to let go of the ideal of eternal growth? Like for the earth to grow, we need to let go of the ideal of eternal economic growth, or?
I think so. I think that's a really dangerous
Like, do we see it in the text? Not what we think. Like, do we?
Okay.
Can we learn it from the text in any way, or not? That's what I'm wondering, because we can learn that from other places, but I'm just curious about what the text tries to teach us.
It kind of seems that way.
Yeah.
Even just in that verse 2, now this is the matter of the release. Because that whole concept of release is the opposite of eternal growth. In my mind, if you're releasing, because if you're releasing a debt, like that act in itself is depleting your own stores, basically. Like it's a depletion for the person who can afford to release the debt. It's not a growth model to be releasing a debt.
So can I just say, I think growth here is a euphemism as applied to capitalism.
Yes.
So rather than calling it growth, I would call it wealth concentration. That's the driving force in capitalism. And it is all about individuals trying to maximize their own wealth and power relative to other people. And yeah, verse 2 here is saying don't do that.
Yeah.
Is saying don't maximize your own wealth
No.
because you want the earth to grow or you want people to grow.
Yeah.
Because you're not allowed to grind your neighbors into the dirt.
And I want
You're
us to
not allowed-
remember though, okay, and I'm not condoning it, but I just want us to be loyal to the text in the sense that we're kind of, they are allowing the Israelites to do that to their neighbors, okay? We need to remember that. Now, as I said, I think today we can't do that at all because it makes no sense. But in Deuteronomy, at least, and I'm not sure that in other bits of Torah, they allow this, but in Deuteronomy, they make a distinction. So theoretically, a person could make money off his neighbors who aren't part of his nation, but not his neighbors who are part of his nation.
Interesting.
Just so we look at the text, okay?
True.
Yeah.
Although I think at the time that the relative sphere of international trade versus local trade would have been, 99.9% local, and the trading with foreigners would have been a tiny fraction of the economy.
Well, the problem is we don't know for sure who would be considered foreign and who would be part of the nation and what's considered local and what's not. So we got to keep that in mind. It's like, because as the Israelites were moving into the land that we would now call Israel, there were people living there already.
Mm-hmm. And they continued living there.
And they continue living there. So that's where we have to kind of be like, okay, what was actually being called local versus foreign?
And also what I'm wondering, and the Mishnah deals with that, I'm wondering if it would not cause people from within the nation to stop lending money to their, as they say, brothers and neighbors, but rather only lend money to so-called Girim, foreigners, because you would have known you can't collect debt, or you could collect debt for 6 years from those close to you, but there's 1 year when you have to release that debt. So I'm just kind of curious, we'll have to kind of go more into that and see how this structure wouldn't emotionally prohibit people from supporting those close to them. Again,
so we're getting into.
Go ahead, Robert.
I was going to say we're getting into a sort of fuzzy area between a sacred debt and historical questions of the context, the economic context that surrounds that text, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are historical questions, and a lot depends on when we think the text was written, and in what circumstances we think it was written.
I want to show you one thing that okay, so one quote that really sits here, I think, nicely. Here, do you see this here from Rabbi Soloveitchik? It's at the bottom of the text.
Mm-hmm.
Can somebody read this from Rabbi Soloveitchik, from The Lonely Man of Faith? Here, okay, I'll read it. The halakha, can you hear? Yeah, can you see it? The halakha considers the steady oscillating of the man of faith between majesty and covenant, not as a dialectical, but rather as a complementary movement. The halakha has a monistic approach to reality and has unreservedly rejected any kind of dualism. Halakha believes that there is only one world, not divisible into secular and hallowed sectors. Accordingly, the task of the covenantal man or woman is to be engaged not in dialectical surging forward and retreating, but in uniting the two communities into one community where man is both the creating free agent and the obedient servant of God. And I think for me, this is a reference or kind of, not an answer to what you said, Robert, but a kind of an additional thought to what you said, that I think when we're reading Torah, we're reading it with both of these eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, with the secular and the sacred at once, all the time together. We're looking at the text as a sacred text and as an ideal text. And if you go, I put the link to that source sheet in Sefaria that this quote was taken from. They have some reference, some questions, there are quotes relating to the ideal and practical, or to the fact of, okay, yeah. And then on the other hand, as a sacred thing. So it's sacred on the one hand, and we can learn ideals from it, but I think we're constantly having to ask ourselves, what does it practically mean to the people then and to us now? Both of these things have to be in our mind all the time. It's yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
As a mindset, not as an answer.
Yeah.
So
It's
Robert, that
lenses. It's like the mythological and the historical.
Yeah, we need to bring in the historical or archaeological historical perspectives, but we could also use it as an ideal.
Yeah.
Like both of these things at once.
Yeah.
And fix what needs fixing. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so my other thought was kind of just jumping off of what Miranda had mentioned with the global local, and that was just the idea that there's the interesting fact of how much that piece of it has changed in 2,000 years, like I guess those boundaries have just changed so drastically. So it would be really interesting to see like the context of what it would mean then, and then the context of what that would mean now. Like, how do we actually define that now? So I had that thought after what Miranda said.
We will continue looking at the questions of debt release next time as well, because I think we've only started touching on it. And if people find information, either historical or around this, and I'll also look for some more information about what this actually means and how it was practiced, perhaps at the time, then it would be really interesting to understand it better, what the implications of this were. I just want to go back because Robert sent me a question about one previous text. I think it was from Vaikra. Is this the one about the, okay, is that okay if we continue? We have like 5-10 more minutes, so I just want us to, wanted to kind of look at this again, and then we'll continue with the debt release next time. I think that's for many of us today in this world, that's like the burning question, the debt release. That's like the big question in our society today. So I just wanted to look at this here for a moment. So Robert, if I understood your question correctly, it was how does it make sense that at the beginning of this text, it says that, was it? Oh, that you will not reap. And then it says that we're allowed to, then it says that we can eat from the land. That was the question? Oh, Catherine raised her hand. Wait, Catherine raised her hand. Oh. Yes, Catherine.
I think that when it says that, you know, you're allowed to eat from the land, you're allowed to take what you need for your personal use for, you know, like that day. When it talks about, you know, like gathering or reaping from the land, you're talking about taking more than you need for that day and either storing it either for your own personal use later, or you're talking about storing it to sell versus, like I say, this, you know, like the single day use, what you need for that day to feed you, to feed your family. I think is the For me anyway, that's the kind of difference between the two.
Any other thoughts?
That was the
I,
same
Thank you,
I
Catherine.
imagine the
Yeah.
Talmud says something about
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
also
where
what some
my
of the
mind
commentators on Torah talk about. But maybe there's other thoughts here.
Mm.
Um, they are making some distinction between the types of, like the pruning and the harvesting. Like there's different types of them. Some of them are done to kind of make sure the kind of, it takes care of the plants in a way that makes sure they grow more. So we're not supposed to do that. Like all sorts of actions that we do to have more produce, where we're interfering with the plant. We're not supposed to do that. That's some of the references talk about that. Some of them talk about, and you'll see it in verse 5, the consecrated vines. Okay, so there's like pieces of your field that have been consecrated by you for various things, and are kind of out of bounds to other people. You're not supposed to make use of that because they're not open, if I understood that correctly. But we can look at it, people are welcome to go and look at that and see if they find other explanations. Did that answer? Did these answers answer your question, Robert?
Yeah, I think so. I imagine there's multiple tractates in Talmud spelling out all the details of what you can and cannot do. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm hoping that when we finish this book, we can go and look at the Yerushalmi Talmud. The Talmud Yerushalmi has one tractate that only exists in the Talmud Yerushalmi, and it deals with agriculture. It's not in the Babylonian Talmud. And then, so that's a special tractate, and it would be very interesting to see how they talk about Shemitah and what information that, for me it would be very interesting to see how they talk about Shemitah and how they, yeah. Beseder. I wanted to kind of point your attention just before we end here in the music and other sources referencing Shemitah. And you're welcome to add any art or music that you found. I put a link here to an article about a song by Meir Ariel, who's an Israeli artist, was, alav shalom, sadly, very sadly passed away. Mm-hmm. And one of his songs has a very interesting commentary about Shemitah. And cool. I'll just read it, but can you see this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so here's the link to the actual song, to the music. But they did a translation here of it. Like, you can't really translate his poetry. It's just very difficult to translate it. But they did a nice job here. And when he says Yerushalayim, of course, he means the land of Israel. And he talks about this ability or question of, are we able to let go? And Ken, so I'm just inviting you to go and read this and see what he wrote, and then listen to the song a few times if you want. And if you want to bring some thoughts about it next week, that would be interesting. Okay. So it's all here in the notebook. If you can't access it, tell me and I'll send you a link. So, any other thoughts before we close today?
I just have a quick question about how I can actually access the notebook.
Oh, okay. So when I sent you an email, you're actually part of a group. I may be part of. Okay, so 1 second. Okay, I'm just going to stop recording. gonna stop recording here now.